So today I'm going to show you my technique of centering clay. And the very first thing that I do is I wedge my clay. I use a ram's head technique with a little bit of a Tootsie Roll twist to it, and then I trim off the edges. And if you want more information on how I do my wedging, I encourage you to take a look at one of my other YouTube videos called Throwing Tall. It has some really detailed wedging information on it. If you've looked at my other video where I wedge the clay, you'll know that I already start out with a nice cylinder-shaped ball of clay. One of the reasons why I do that is, first of all, I love how you start out with a flat piece of clay from the very beginning. Sometimes I've seen potters use a rounded piece, and when they throw it down to the bat, they actually can get air pockets that can get trapped in the bottom, and that will affect how you throw the clay later on. I also like the cylinder shape because from the very beginning, as you can see, I almost have the clay centered, and the closer that you can get the clay to the center of the bat from the very beginning, the less time you have to spend centering it later on. First thing I'm going to do is let's find the center of the bat. Make sure that your bat is nice and clean, that there's no other clay left on it or anything. I'm going to start it spinning and take my wet finger and start tracing a little water finger mark. That's going to be my target where I'm going to slam the clay down. Now you don't want to put too much water on the bat. If you do, your clay will slide right off. But you do need just a little bit of water for attachment for the clay. I've actually seen some people just put a little dab of water right in the center, and that's as much water as you need. But right now I've got the water traced on here, I've got the center mapped out, and all I need to do is take my cylinder and slam it down. Okay. Now as you'll see, there's still a little wobble, there's still a little play in it. It's adhered just a little bit, but it still needs to be adhered a little bit more so I can get a tight seal on it. So what I do is I take my dry hands and I start patting the clay down just to make sure that that is tightly sealed to the bat. You don't want it to go anywhere when you start centering it, coning it up. Okay? Now that's much better. Before I get the wheel moving, let's talk a little bit about posture. It's very important for you to move your body up right around the splash pan, and then also you'll want to start tightening your body up. Your body, think about your body as the tool. You'll want to have a very straight arm. You're going to want to lock your arm. To do that, use your elbow, place that against, place your arm against the splash pan and your elbow on your leg, and that'll help to lock your arm in place. Also, when I'm using my hands, a lot of times I'll lock my fingers over one another, and I'll lock my thumbs together. And that way, if one hand tries to move, the other one hopefully will be in, to help keep it in one spot. You'll want to also try to position your body so that your head is kind of right up over top of that clay mound in order to gain a little bit of leverage when you're throwing. One other important thing to remember when you start to throw on the wheel is the amount of water that you use with your clay. If you look at a lot of YouTube videos, you're going to see some potters actually put their clay on the bat, and I mean toss water right over top of their clay. One of the reasons why they might do this is because they start out with a really groggy, stiff piece of clay, and that water will help to condition the clay, and it will help to soften it up a little bit. The clay that I'm using today is porcelain, and the porcelain starts out a little bit stiff, but the amount of water you put on there is very important. If I were to toss that much water on top of that mound of clay, it would slate down and create just a muddy mess. So what I do instead to avoid that problem is I try to get it centered as fast as possible to avoid having to put a lot of water on it. But I also, instead of putting the water on the clay itself, I put it on my fingertips and on my hands, and that's it. And then I start working with it. So now that we have the clay, as close to, as possible as we can to the center, you'll notice that it's right there in that sweet spot in the center of the bat, but it's still wobbly. If you'll notice, my hands are still kind of wobbling around. They're not totally perfect. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to try to alleviate some of that wobbliness by doing one technique that I was taught as a beginner. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the palm of my left hand down here at the base of the clay mound, and I'm going to use this side of my right hand. Now, some people actually go right straight on top of it like a karate chop. I sort of go at an angle. I move at an angle and kind of go downward. But you're going to see a lot of different versions of that from different potters. And why they do that is to kind of get it as close to center as possible. Okay? As you can see, that made a big difference. I just did it, like I said, if you can see, you can actually see the clay that's left on my hands. I used this part right here on my right hand and down here on my left hand. And as you can see, that helped with a lot of those wobbles. Now I have a nice piece of clay that I can start to cone up and down. The coning process actually helps the clay to become conditioned. It will take out some of the little air pockets. And once you get that clay mound back down, you're going to have a nice, totally, hopefully, centered piece of clay. And so what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to get a little more water on the palms of my hands and my fingertips. I'm going to squeeze my hands together using the largest areas of my hands, that is the palms. Okay? See, I'm going to put that mound of clay between my palms. I'm going to tighten my, lock my fingers in place and lock my thumbs. And I'm going to start squeezing. Just squeeze from both sides. This takes a little bit of practice. And if your clay is harder, it's going to be a little more, it's going to be tougher to do. If it's softer, it's going to be a little easier, and you may not have to go as high. But as you can see, it's still wobbling around. So I'm going to go a little bit higher. And the other thing is, I'm going to spin the wheel a little bit faster. That's going to help me to figure out, get a nice squeeze on the clay. Gently release it. I'm going to get rid of some of that clay at the bottom there. I'm going to go one more time. Get a little more water on the palms. I'm going to work my way from the bottom. Spin it faster. You always spin a little bit faster when you're coning. Go all the way to the top. There we go. Now that I have the clay all the way up, it looks like the clay is pretty darn, it's very close to center. Now I'm going to start pushing that clay back down. We're going to push the top of this clay cone all the way back down and into center. To do that, again, put a little bit more water on my palms. I'm going to use this hand and wrap it around the sides of the clay, and that's going to be my guard. It's going to keep the clay from pushing outward. And this hand, I'm going to go from the top. I'm going to start pushing inward and down, okay? So, I'm going to go all the way down to the bat. And then I'm going to do a slow release on the clay. Okay? And put a little more water on my hands. Push it down a little more. I'm going to spin it faster. Notice that I'm locking my thumbs together, and then I just slowly release. Okay, it's still got just a little bit of wobble in there. I'm going to go down just a little further. And then just slowly release. That looks good. And we're going to check to make sure that we're totally, that we have it totally centered. You can do that by spinning the wheel and visually looking for any wobble. That actually looks pretty darn good. You can do that with your hands by getting the hands wet and putting those over top of it and making sure that your hands are not wobbling. That looks pretty good. Now, if you're going to do it this way, be careful when you release the clay again, because that can knock it off center. So I'm just going to gently release my hands. It looks pretty good. The other way to check it is I'll take my finger, and just to make sure I don't have any wobble in it, and I kind of lock my fingers together and I go down the clay just to make sure I don't have any areas that are like any air bubbles and stuff. I can feel it a lot better with just one finger. See, when I get to the bottom, a lot of times I'll have a little extra clay. I'm really bad about that. So I just eliminate that with that finger. And that's totally round, totally centered. Now, you got to remember that I've been doing this for years. So please, if you're just a beginner potter and trying to center your clay, it can be very, very frustrating and a little bit discouraging at first. But don't give up. It takes a lot of practice, and the more practice that you do, the more muscle memory that you'll develop, and the easier that it's going to become. But you have to put in the time. Thanks for joining me in the studio today. If you like our videos, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. I'll see you next time in the studio.